Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We will be starting our meeting with the Daughters of the American Revolution opening ritual. So if you are able to, please stand and remain standing through our opening ritual. By virtue of authority vested in me as Regent of Daniel H. Brush Chapter of the National Society Daughters of the American Revolution, I now declare this meeting in session. Please stand and remain standing throughout the opening ritual to perpetuate the memory and the spirit of the men and women who achieved American independence, to promote the development of an enlightened public opinion, and to foster patriotic citizenship. These are the objects of the National Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution. Yea, I have a goodly heritage. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. And First Vice Regent Rindleman will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. She has a lovely little flag that she will hold up. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And Anne, can you lead us in the American Creed? I believe in the United States of America, of the government of the people, by the people, for the people, whose just powers are derived from the consent govern. Democracy in a republic, a sovereign nation upon the sovereign states, a perfect union, one and inseparable, established upon those principles of freedom, equality, justice, and humanity, for which American patriots sacrificed their lives and fortunes. I therefore believe it is my duty to my country to love it, to support its Constitution, to obey its laws, to respect its flag, and to defend it against all enemies. Thank you. You may be seated. Welcome, everyone. Very happy to see everyone's smiling faces this morning. I'm very excited about the program today. I have had the pleasure of hearing Darrel give several different presentations, all on different subjects, and very knowledgeable and does a great job presenting, in my opinion. So Darrel is a noted historian author, specializing in the events and the people that shaped Southern Illinois. He is best known for his historical sketches and for the depth of background research in his books, including Bondage in Egypt, Slavery in Southern Illinois, A Trot Down to Egypt. Sorry, I'm reading this off my phone. There's a glare. The Lincoln-Douglas debates in Jonesboro, Illinois, and the pioneer sketches of Union County. The Bondage in Egypt has become a nationally acclaimed and most comprehensive account of slavery and its aftermath in the United States. Darrel is a recipient of the National Award in American History, which is the highest award given to the National Society Daughters of the American Revolution by the Daughters of the American Revolution. He is also awarded the Delta Award, presented by friends at SIU Morris Library, for those who have written about Southern Illinois' distinction. He's also responsible for saving and archiving many of the at-risk historical records in Southern Illinois, including family and military service records. In his spare time, Darrel is a teacher of American history, the He is the recipient of the Olive Foster Teacher of the Year presented by the Illinois State Historical Society. We are pleased to have Darrel addressing our public and our members with the intriguing topic of pulling the sheets off the 1920s Ku Klux Klan in the deep Southern Illinois. So, Darrel.
All right, will this work? We'll just do it this way. Well, I don't know. She said it wouldn't work. Really have to hold it close to be heard. So I want to thank you all for coming. I see several familiar faces. So I have a friendly crowd, I hope. You know, as a historian, as a history teacher, usually we celebrate history. And history, a lot of the reason history is even taught to high school students, middle school students, is to celebrate our past. But history sometimes isn't a celebration. And sometimes it makes people feel uncomfortable. And in researching this topic in particular, it gave me kind of an uncomfortable, sad feeling. And the topic of the Second Ku Klux Klan in Southern Illinois, particularly the highlight is Pulaski and Alexander counties, Illinois. It's nothing I ever heard about. And I was born in Cairo in 1962, and I grew up in Owen. And I had families from the farming communities, and nobody ever told me about this. So this is right down the road from where I grew up in Owen. And so this was the site of a big Klan rally in 1924. And I lived at the house down the road, not the one in the picture, but on the opposite side of the road. And I drove by that every day as a little kid, never knowing the historical significance that this site had to the Klan. In starting to do research on the topic, I didn't find, well, one person in Alexander and Pulaski counties who claimed to remember anything about the Ku Klux Klan. Nobody remembered. I had one gentleman who said, no, that's not, that there was no Klan. I don't know about any Klan around here. Just as background information, because what I'm talking about today is called the Second Ku Klux Klan. It was revived in 1915 and became very popular here in the 1920s. But to go back just for a very brief history of the Ku Klux Klan, the first Klan is what it's called, that was organized in Pulaski, Tennessee, not Pulaski, Illinois, but Pulaski, Tennessee in 1865. And about a dozen or so Confederate Army veterans got together and created a fraternal society, kind of like the Masons. Not that the Masons are white supremacists, but it was that type of a club or organization. They were just going to get together. And of course, what it evolved into was the invisible empire of the South. When Nathan Bedford Forrest became the leader of the Klan, it became an organization with a political agenda. And the political agenda was to disfranchise Black voters. Black men had been given the vote in 1870, and because Black citizens were a large majority, or at least a majority in some of the regions of the South, oftentimes Black men were elected to office. And that offended the former Confederates in the South. And so the agenda or the purpose of the organization was to disfranchise Black citizens, to keep them through intimidation, fear, whatever means, to keep them from going to the polls and voting. Now, if you look at the picture on the right, this is a drawing that was made of a man in the Ku Klux Klan in Southern Illinois in the 1870s. This is the Williamson Franklin County Ku Klux Klan that emerged in 1874. And there were other Klan organizations. They were called Ku Klux. Ku Klux probably comes from a Greek word that means kick close, which means circle. That is what a lot of historians think the origin of the name Ku Klux was. But these groups in Southern Illinois were called Ku Klux in the press, but they really had no connection. Their agenda was not the same, to be honest, as the Southern Klan. So in researching the Ku Klux Klan of the first Klan in Southern Illinois, they did lynch one man. He was a white man. And a lot of the beatings that are at least reported in newspapers of that time, a lot of the violence that was reported in newspapers of that time was violence of the Klan against white citizens, with exceptions. So there was a Klan organization reported in the newspapers outside of Cairo in the 1870s, and they were night riders, and they came into a Black settlement in Cairo on horseback, and there was a confrontation. There are a couple other exceptions, but for the most part, the first Klan in Southern Illinois was more about intimidating people. It was more about, as they said, having fun than it was any political agenda. The other thing about the first Ku Klux Klan, it was equally divided between Republicans and Democrats. So there wasn't that political agenda in the first Klan. But it was the foundation for the second Klan. So people that were from the South knew the first Klan. They knew about the violence. They knew about the agenda that the Klan had to disfranchise Black people. They knew that the Klan in the South was a terror organization. They knew that, but history was being rewritten very subtly through novels. Novels, especially by a guy named the Reverend Thomas F. Dixon. He wrote a trilogy that sold millions of copies. And in this story of the Klan, it was a fictionalized, romanticized version of the Klan. And it said the Klan are the heroes. They're the protectors of white womanhood, that they're the heroes. They redeemed the South from what they called Black rule. And they presented the Klan in a very positive light. And after these books were written, plays were written, and people began putting together, actors began putting together companies that would travel by train from town to town, city to city, and they would perform the Ku Klux Klan. And again, it presented the Klan in a very positive light. And this is from the newspaper in Cairo in 1906. When the Klan was first being performed on the stage, and on the right is the Cairo Opera House from inside. And you know, they're called opera houses. A lot of places had opera houses. They didn't perform opera in those houses. Those were basically vaudeville houses. So different companies, actors would come through and put on performances, and people would buy a ticket. But We hear of opera. Our town had an opera house, as if they were going on Saturday to listen to opera. That's not the way it worked. Reverend Dixon himself came to Cairo to speak at the Opera House. So not only was his play performed, but he came to Cairo to speak. And he spoke a very unapologetic white supremacist lecture. Not everybody, as I said, was fooled by this whitewashed version of the Klan. This is Thomas Dixon. And there were people, like I said, who knew the Klan firsthand, who had experienced the Klan South. And they had moved, in many cases, they had moved to Cairo, to Mounds, to Ullen, to other communities in Southern Illinois metropolis to escape the violence of the Klan. And they knew that the Klan image was being whitewashed. In other words, people were being told a lie about the Klan. And they wanted that to stop. And in Cairo, there was a group of prominent, There was a group of prominent Black citizens that met in a church at Cairo, and they wanted to stop the performance of the Klansmen to play. And they got together, and they passed resolutions. They said Thomas Dixon is the worst enemy currently of what they called the Negro race. They said there's nobody more dangerous to our rights as Black men and Black women than Mr. Dixon, who is writing these novels, putting the Klan in a very positive light. And they met with the mayor, this group of citizens that was elected from the larger group. They met with Mayor Parsons in Cairo, and they said, we don't want this played. We don't want it performed. They met with the chief of police, Michael Egan. He said, we don't want it performed. And they met with the manager of the Opera House. And they all said no. They said it's going to be performed. There's nothing they claimed that they could do about it. The play had been banned in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, by the city of Philadelphia. It had been banned in Montgomery, Alabama. It had been banned in Macon, Georgia, but not in Cairo, Illinois. And probably things got worse when they decided, D.W. Griffith decided to take the novel and make a film out of it. And this film is called The Birth of the Nation. It's a black and white silent film, The Birth of the Nation. It glorified the first Ku Klux Klan. It presented the Klan as the redeemers of the South. And people watched it, just like some people watch movies today that are supposedly based on a true story. A lot of times it's very little truth that you would find in some of those films. So this is D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. It also was playing all around in theaters. It came out in 1915. And one man watched this movie and he decided he wanted to reorganize or restart the Ku Klux Klan. And that man was William J. Simmons, who's pictured there on the right. He was a Methodist minister. He preached in the Methodist Church, and he wanted to basically start a club that would stress Protestant Christianity, what he called old-time religion. And up on top of Stone Mountain in Georgia, outside of Atlanta, the Ku Klux Klan was reborn. And they built an altar. They built a cross and set it on fire. They had a cross and a Bible on the table, and then they had certain emblems that represented the Ku Klux Klan, and the Ku Klux Klan was recreated. And within 5 years, maybe a little more than that, they claimed to have 5 million members nationwide of the Second Ku Klux Klan. Well, what did the Klan stand for? The Second Klan, which started in the 1915, and people debate when it really ended, at least by the end of the 1930s, it still existed, but it was such a small organization. But its height was the 1920s. And this is what the Klan was opposed to. They were opposed to suffrage for Black people. Now, by 1920, Black women and white women as well were given the right to vote. So they were against suffrage for Black citizens. They were very clear about that. They were against any ideas of equality for Black citizens and white citizens. They also were opposed to Jews because they claimed Jews cannot be true Americans because Jews want a homeland in Palestine. So their allegiance, they claimed, is not going to be to America. Their allegiance is going to be to a foreign country. They used the same argument for Catholics. They said Catholics actually, they claimed, their allegiance to a foreign pope. So Catholics, Jews, Black people are un-American. That was a term they used a lot, un-American. Immigrants. They didn't think immigrants could assimilate and become American citizens and like our values, unless, note, they came from Nordic countries of Europe. And Nordic countries is kind of code for German and England, Northern Europe. In other words, no Italians. We don't want Italians or French people. We don't want people from Eastern Europe, Russia coming in. These German and English people can assimilate, but others can't, they claimed. They also were very opposed to labor unions, and they equated labor unions with socialism and communism, and they were very much opposed to the teaching of evolution in public schools. That was what they were against. Well, what were they for? Well, they're for white supremacy. They're for what they call that old time religion. They're for prohibition and traditional, what they called traditional family values. One of the interesting aspects in doing research on this topic was that I thought, well, the Klan was, became popular in Southern Illinois because we're close to the South. And the Klan is Southern and we're, Southern-like. But in doing research, the Klan in Illinois didn't start in Cairo and go north. The Klan started in Northern Illinois, Chicago. So in 1921, they had a Klan rally in Chicago that newspapers said 10,000 people attended. Springfield, Illinois, the so-called Abraham Lincoln Clavern of the Ku Klux Klan, met in the Coliseum, the building that's still there on the fairgrounds today in Springfield. They met there and organized. Actually, they had a meeting and a rally that went on until 4 a.m. in the morning. East St. Louis had a membership that peaked in 1925. East St. Louis membership was 8,000 people in 1925. This is heavy, Yeah, okay, thank you. 1923 is when recruitment started here in Southern Illinois. So 1923, Franklin County, Jackson County, Williamson County, Perry County, those counties in Southern Illinois is where Klan recruitment started first. And then later, it started in Pulaski and Alexander County. So in Pulaski County, they sent from Indiana a person that's called a Kleagle. And Kleagle is a term that means recruiter, membership recruiter. And his name was Forrest Hazel Moreland. And he came from Indiana to Pulaski County. And he went around recruiting. Well, how would you recruit for the Ku Klux Klan? Well, they went to the Masonic Lodge and said, let's have your list of members. They went to there was a lodge called the Independent Order of Oddfellows. Let's have your list of members. We're going to go and visit these people. And then the other strategy that they had, when you're going into a town to recruit, go talk to the Methodist preacher in the town, or the Baptist preacher in the town, or any of the Protestant preachers, and get them on board. Tell them we'll make them a member of the Klan at a big discount, and we'll make them a chaplain of the local chapter. And it worked. Sadly, it worked. These are clippings from the Pulaski Enterprise newspaper in Pulaski County. It talks about a Klan rally or meeting in Karnak, which is Pulaski County, Villa Ridge, and Mounds. The middle one talks about Grand Chain and a Klan meeting that was held in Grand Chain. And then the other one on the right was a meeting. I can't read it. Oh, the Christian Church in Cairo. Yeah. So by early 1923, recruitment efforts had really picked up. One of the preachers was a guy named William Paul Anderson, and he was the pastor of the First Christian Church in Cairo. And the Klan, he was preaching one day about, the topic was brotherly love. And he was preaching about brotherly love. And I'm sure he knew this was happening. But as he began to preach, the Klan walked into the church, walked down the center aisle, and stood in front of the altar behind the podium where he was speaking, and handed him an envelope. And in the envelope was $100 and a letter. And letters typically said, we are Klan, we're 1 million strong, and we're growing in your area, and we want your support. And this donation to you and your church is to show what we think of your church's efforts. It was like a bribe. You know, it was like a bribe. And small churches, large churches as well, often need money. And sometimes they don't think where that money's coming from. In Alexander County, the first time that ploy or tactic was used was in the Thebes Methodist Church. And notice the headline says, thousands attend Thebes Klan meet. So in a revival meeting in Thebes Methodist Church, the Klan appeared in their robes, and they walked down the aisle, and they did the same thing. They handed him, this case, it was $100. And they said, $75 is for you to paint your church. We think your church needs to be painted. $25 is for the pastor to use for himself, however he would like. It was repeated again in a revival meeting in Mounds at the Congregational Church. They actually had an evangelist, a woman, a female evangelist, who came in to speak at the Congregational Church. The church was packed. People were standing outside, not able to get in. And while the congregation was singing the Battle Hymn of the Republic, right on cue, down the center aisle marches the Ku Klux Klan, gives the envelope full of money, and everybody says, oh, this organization, how do I join that? They're supporting our church. They painted the one in Thebes. That was repeated in a church at Sandusky, and it also was repeated at Ullen. So 8 KKK members marched down the Ullen Methodist Church in the Sunday morning service and presented the pastor with the check. And then after they presented the check and the envelope, they said, because they were hooded and robed, they looked back and said, anybody want us to take our hoods off? And they said no. And so they just sat in the front row, hooded through the church service. And then when it was over, they got in their cars and they had a parade through the streets of Owen. Even though the Pulaski County Sheriff said, we won't allow that. We won't allow, in my county, he said, I'm not going to allow the Klan to parade robed in Pulaski County. But they just ignored his order. So they met, the Klan met in the Baptist church at Owen, and that's where they had their organizational meeting, and so many people were interested in meeting and joining the Klan that they had what they call a naturalization service in this field. It was a pasture then, on June 10th, 1924. And about 1,000 people attended. Now, only when I was growing up in Owen, only 500 people lived in the town. I don't think the population was greater than that in 1924. But the news release about this event said that our reporters walked by and looked at the license plate, because back then you could look at license plate and tell where the people were from. And the newspaper reporter said, we noticed people there from Grand Chain, Karnak, Cypress, Pulaski, Thebes, Elko, Tams, Mounds, Weetag, Dongola, and Cairo. And then after the naturalization ceremony, where the people became a member of the Klan, they burned a 30-foot cross in the pasture. And of course, that cross was easily seen by Black residents on the west side of Owen. And that was a form of intimidation. It was a statement saying, we're here. And it was a form of intimidation. These came from SIU Special Collections. So this is the application people used to join the Klan. It cost $21.50 to join the Klan. And in the 1920s, of course, that's a lot of money. And if you know much about the history of the 1920s, they call them the Roaring 20s. It's a time where business was allegedly booming. Everybody seemed to be making money, but farmers. Farmers weren't benefiting. And so to come up with $20.50 was quite an achievement. They became naturalized after this meeting, a naturalized citizen. And I have a copy of the ceremony, we'll call it, that they used. And in this, the applicants had to state very affirmatively and emphatically, they were native born, they were white, they were Gentiles, they were American citizens, and, quote, they would faithfully support the eternal maintenance of white supremacy. This also came from SIU Special Collections on the left. It's a summons to a Klan meeting. So what I wanted to do as a historian was to see, well, what were the results of the Klan in these counties? Were there negative impacts that were readily seen? And after the Klan began recruiting in Pulaski County, there was a farming settlement outside of Owen called New Hope. And there was a church out there, New Hope Methodist Church. There was a cemetery still there. And actually the road going by that, even though there's no remnants of the community anymore, there's New Hope Road. If you've ever taken the road to Shawnee College from Owen, you've passed it many times. Well, in 1924, a man decided he wanted to plant cotton on his farm. And he invited a Black family from Charleston, Missouri, to come and live there on his farm in the New Hope settlement. And as soon as they moved in, the next day or the next night, they were visited by a group of Klansmen. And they had tied a bundle of switches together, and they had left it on the doorstep with a note that said, "You have 1 week to move out." And the family moved out. So they moved to another location. They were intimidated, rightly so perhaps, but they may have, I think, probably the wise decision for them to move. Only about a week later, there was a similar incident between Tams and Elko. And there was an unwritten law that said Black people can live in Tams, but they can't live any farther north. And the cutoff was called the gravel pit switch. The gravel pit switch was where the railroad had a switch that went to the gravel pit to load gravel, and then they would, get back on the main M&O railroad and go from there. So Black people could live south of that, but they couldn't live in Alexander County north of that line. Well, a man named Israel Cobble once again wanted to plant cotton, and he went to Tennessee and brought several Black families to his tenant house on his farm. And the same thing happened at New Hope. They showed up in the night. This time they had guns and they had cans of kerosene. And they called the people in the house outside and said, "You're going to have to leave. We've got kerosene. We've got guns." And the man, the leader of the group of families, said, "We have guns too." And they went back in the house and there was a gunfight. The white people in the Klan who had showed up to burn the house, I can just imagine them saying, I didn't think they'd have guns. When you asked me to come out here and burn the house, I didn't think I'd have to dodge bullets. So they even abandoned their cans of kerosene and they skedaddled back to Elko, where they were from. But in that gunfire, one of the men, Dan Smothers was his name, he was wounded. And the newspaper account said it was just a minor graze. But he spent 18 days in the hospital in Cairo. So I think they probably were not telling the truth about that. That happened after a Klan rally in Elko. In Harrisburg, Illinois, which isn't in the Pulaski-Alexander County content or region, but in May of 1924, they had a Klan rally in Harrisburg, and it was followed by a lynching attempt of a Black man in jail named Norman Keyes, who was accused of attacking a white merchant. So when the Klan comes in with all of this hateful rhetoric, there are consequences. It wasn't just a club to have picnics together. There were consequences to their activities. This is the side on the right of the house that was where they dynamited the house, but they just blew off the front porch. So they fixed it and people lived in it. And my aunt lived in that house for about 10 years. I went there and visited her often, and she never knew, and I never knew, that house had been firebombed by the KKK in 1924. But it was right there. I was in that house. It was weird. So at the height of the Klan recruitment in 1924, Ida B. Wells Barnett came back to Southern Illinois. She came to Southern Illinois in 1909 after a lynching in Cairo of Will James, a Black man who was lynched And there also was a white man who was lynched. And she came to investigate, to kind of look into this matter, because she had read newspapers. Well, the Black community in Cairo says that Will Froggy James wasn't a very good person. And this is coming from the white press, but that they weren't all that upset that he had been lynched. And Ida B. Wells came to investigate for herself. And she was met at the train station by a Black man. And she, said, I'm here to investigate the lynching. And what do you think about Will James? And the comment was a very negative one, that he wasn't anybody we're very proud of. And Ida B. Wells got very upset. She wouldn't even stay in that man's house. She got very upset, and she talked to all the Black churches. She went around from church to church, and she said, don't you see that if you allow lynching of one Black man for whatever reason to go unchecked, it hurts all Black men. So you have to stand up. It had nothing to do with Froggy James, as he was called, or his character, whatever that was. But when it happened, she said, you have to stand up against it. You can't let it go unchecked without standing up. She was invited back to speak in Cairo when the Klan was recruiting. And the newspaper in Cairo had an article in the middle of the paper that said, Ida B. Wells is coming to Cairo, and she's been invited by the Black Women's Club. On the left was an article, about a Klan rally in Karnak. On the right was about a Klan meeting proposed in Cairo. So she was kind of, at least in the press, she was boxed in. And the press, unfortunately, didn't record what Mrs. Barnett said when she came to Cairo. So on the left is Pulaski County Sheriff Ira John Hudson, and he was the sheriff in Pulaski County that said the Klan will not parade in the streets as long as I'm sheriff. The Klan won't parade in my county. Something happened in 1924. It's a very sad story, but there was an 18-year-old girl. Her name is Daisy Wilson, and she was murdered outside of her father's store in Villa Ridge. And the robbers, it was an attempted robber. It was a robbery. The robbers got 26 cents. And the robber, one of them said he turned around as he was running away and shot just to be shooting. And he shot Daisy Wilson in the eye, and she died. The Klan surrounded the countryside looking for two young Black men. And of course, they found lots of young Black men that would have fit that description. And Forrest Moreland thought, well, and that's the organizer of the Klan, he thought, well, they probably went to Mounds and they're going to hop on a freight train and get out of town. So I'm going to go to Mounds. And he arrested two young Black men from Mounds, and put them in the jail in Mounds for questioning. Word got around that they had arrested two suspects. And as the story began to be told over and over again, it got to, we've got the two people that killed Daisy, and a lynch mob formed around the jail at Mounds. And the sheriff arrived, and the lynch mob of several hundred people was around the jail at Mounds, which wasn't even the county jail. And they said, Sheriff Hudson, send them out. We want to give them quick justice. You have the two murderers of Daisy Wilson in there, and we're going to lynch them. We're going to hang them. We don't need a trial. We're going to hang them. And Forrest Moore, this is the most ironic event in my mind. Forrest Moreland, who was the head of the Klan, steps out in front of all of his Klansmen and he says, let's pray about this. And of course, they take their hats off and they're going to pray. And Forrest Moreland says, forgive these men for what they're about to do. He knew that those two guys he had arrested weren't likely the ones who had actually killed Daisy Wilson. There was a man that came in on the train. They'd come up from Memphis on a train, hopped a freight train. And there were witnesses that said, these guys were with us on the train from Memphis. When did this so-called murder happen? And he prayed for about 10 minutes. And when he said amen, and this is newspaper accounts, not just locally, but nationally, they said the men put their hats back on, they got in their cars, and they drove off. When somebody, albeit even though a Klan leader, stands up to lynch mobs, oftentimes lynching could be averted. I'm not saying that he's a hero, but he did perhaps a heroic thing in this one instance. The two men were not guilty. It was a couple days later that they captured the two men that had murdered and confessed to murdering Daisy Wilson, but they came that close to murdering two innocent people. And I think Klansmen began to think about that. I was sure that they were the ones. And they knew, and if they thought about it, they knew that that hateful rhetoric of white supremacy is what can lead to violence. I think that was a big reason the Klan membership dropped off drastically the next year and disappeared within a couple years in Pulaski and Alexander County. And nationally, the Klan organization also dropped off. And most historians, not just looking at local Klan in Southern Illinois, but looking at the Klan nationally, most historians believe that it was scandals of the leadership. Here was a Klan promoting, they claimed, white Protestant Christianity, old-time religion, prohibition. And then we have the organizer, the Reverend W.J. Simmons, who was kicked out of the Methodist Church for drunkenness and insufficiency. As a matter of fact, they kicked him out of the Klan for drunkenness. In the middle is Edward Young Clark, who became the Imperial Wizard of the Second Klan. And then on the right is Elizabeth Tyler. She's the one that's really given the credit, if that's the right word, for making the Klan an organization of about 5 million people. Well, Mr. Clark and Miss Tyler were caught together in a hotel room in Atlanta, Georgia. Not only were they together in the same hotel room, but they had a bottle of alcohol with them during Prohibition. And so you say you stand for Prohibition and, morality, values, traditional family values, and this is what you give us? Before Illinois became a self-governing body of the Klan, it was tied in with Indiana. And David Curtis Stevenson was the person responsible for recruiting in Indiana and Illinois. He also gained a reputation as a heavy drinker and a womanizer. That's the term they used then. We use different terms for that today. Not just did he have a reputation, but we know in court records in 1925, he kidnapped a girl, he raped her on a train, he beat her nearly to death, And her name was Madge Oberholzer, I believe. And he was convicted of that and sentenced to life in prison. And he was the person responsible for the oversight of recruiting for the Klan in Illinois. And then on the right, there are people that I know that still believe S. Glenn Young was a hero. To some people, he is a hero, but he was a leader of the Klan in Williamson and Franklin counties. What we know about him was that he was fired from the Prohibition Unit of the federal government because he killed an alleged bootlegger near Granite City. He wasn't charged with murder, but people thought in the organization that he was too gun happy. He had gone too far. Investigations showed that he frequently checked into hotels with a mistress. That was common knowledge, and his wife divorced him during this time for adultery. But the negative impact that he had was that he was seen as the leader of the Franklin and Williamson County Klan, but people read in the newspaper about the Klan War that was going on, where 20 people were killed from 1924 to 1926. And he was fighting Prohibition. That's what he came to Williamson County for. And he was killed in a shootout in Herrin in 1925. So people saw the violent end. When they thought of Klan now, they thought of violence. And people didn't want, a majority of people didn't want to be a part of that organization. I read one account, this is sadly, a man said, I was a part of the Ku Klux Klan. He said, I joined it for the fun of it. And then he said, I had to drop out because people were starting to think I was a bigot and a racist. And so he dropped out, he dropped his membership out of the Ku Klux Klan. I didn't make that up. That's a true story. In 1925, that's the last reference to the local Ku Klux Klan in Alexander and Pulaski County. It seemed to have kind of faded from local memory. My grandfather was born in 1891. If I had known to ask him about this, he could have told me all kinds and would have told me all kinds of things. The Klan rallied in Washington, D.C. This is one of the saddest pictures of the Klan march, and you can see the U.S. Capitol building in the back. Several thousand people showed up for the Klan. It sometimes is painful when we're reminded of these things that happened in our past. It embarrasses us sometimes, even though we didn't do it. The towns that we grew up in and know about experience these things. And the number of people that stood up to the Klan, or at least there's a record of standing up to the Klan in Southern Illinois, is a very small list. People went along with it. They didn't join the Klan, they were bystanders. So it can be painful to remember this part of our past, but keep this in mind. It's more dangerous if we allow ourselves to forget about it. That's the lesson that I hope to share with you today. So I think I took up about 10 minutes of your question time, but if you do have questions, I'll be glad to try to answer any of those.
If you have any questions, I'm going to bring the microphone over to you so that people on Zoom can hear them as well. Okay.
Hi, what was the origin of the name Ku Klux Klan?
I think it was a Greek word, kick close, which means circle. I think that's what most people seem to think it originated from that. Kick close, and then Ku Klux. And then everything that dealt with the clans started with K's.
I'm loud. Okay, that's right. Yeah, I have a couple quick questions. The first one is, I know you showed the membership form.
Right.
Did you find anything that explained where they were getting their money from besides that? And the other one is, was there a record? Yeah, is there a record of why the white people that were getting lynched were getting lynched?
So the white man that I mentioned who was lynched in 1874 by the Franklin Williamson County Klan, his name was Isaac Vansel, and he was actually born in Union County, Illinois, but had moved north to Williamson and Franklin counties. He and different newspaper accounts from that time period mentioned different reasons why he was lynched, but most of them agree it's because he had kicked his wife out of the house and had moved another woman in. And they didn't think that that was a type of morality they wanted to support. And they warned him about it, they said. He ignored their warning, and they showed up one night, about 20, took him from his cabin, took him to a tree in the woods, and there they lynched and killed him. Yeah. And the other question was, the Klan got money from the $10 membership, and if you joined the Klan, you couldn't make your own sheet and robe and hood. You had to buy it. So that was $21.50. So when you're talking about, let's say that their numbers are accurate, 5 million people, that's where the money was coming from. Yeah. And it really was a couple people that, not locally, but I read interviews of Klan members from the 1920s and other areas, said that it's a pyramid scheme. The only way you could advance in the Klan was to get another member to join. That's the only way you could move up. So they didn't like that. But yeah, money was flowing pretty easily.
We have a question from Zoom. I heard of the Klan being active in the Heron area in the 1930s and 40s. Were they connected to the group you are talking about?
The Heron Klan, I'm not as familiar with. I just kind of didn't focus on that research. I know they existed in the 20s. And when this Klan, the Second Klan, originated, it was about, I think, 1921 was when they had their first meeting, public meeting of the Klan. At least that's in newspapers. Now, as far as the Klan after 1930 or into the 40s, you know, and it's kind of deceiving because historians will call it the first Klan, the second Klan, the third Klan, but really it's just a wave. It's the same anti-Semitic, anti-African-American hatred. It just reappears. So it came in the 1870s. It died down. It came back in the early 1900s, and then it died down. And then it came back, especially in the 1950s and 60s in the South. Now, Klan membership supposedly is at about 6,000 people nationwide.
Was there something going on around 1915, 1920 that precipitated this resurgence? Immigration, prohibition, suffrage for women?
All of those things, there were changes in society that was happening. And conservatives got fearful. And I don't mean conservatives as we would use it, political conservatives today, but people got fearful of this change. I want the good old days. I don't want this change. And the war had happened, World War I had happened, and people were coming back from World War I. Like you said, women were getting the right to vote. Lots of states gave women the right to vote even before the amendment was added. Schools were teaching evolution in some cases, which contradicted the story of creation from the Bible, they thought. There were all kinds of things that were happening in society that was scaring some people. And that caused the resurgence. Yeah.
No. Do you have any record of what went on in Anna because of what the name Anna, they say, stands for?
Anna, I always correct people, so don't be offended, but Anna does not stand for what they said it stands for. Anna was named after a woman who was the wife of the founder of the town. It was a sundown town, so I'm not saying there wasn't anti-Black sentiment there, but the naming of the town, people make an issue with that. In doing research, though, Anna didn't have Ku Klux Klan activity reported in any newspaper of the 1920s. And I think a lot of the reason for that is because the county as a whole, with maybe Cobden as an exception, was sundown. So there were no Black families, residents outside of the state hospital in Anna and outside of Cobden, Illinois. And so there wasn't that paranoia. A lot of the Klan people joined out of a fear of Black people. They were taught to fear Black people. The press, the white press, anytime someone committed a crime and that person was Black, it says Black man shoots white man. Black man robbed store. Black man did this. And in readers' mind, if not consciously, subconsciously, they're taught to equate Black with crime and fear. And in Union County, there were few Black residents that lived there out of fear. Yeah.
We have another question from Zoom. Is there any research showing that any chapters may be still active in the Southern Illinois, Alexander Pulaski County area, or have tried to reboot in the last few decades?
Not that I'm aware of. I've been asked that question several times, and if they are rebooting, they probably wouldn't want me to know about it. So I don't think, as far as I know, I teach school there. I don't hear that kind of talk from students, white or Black students. So I don't think that is there now. Now, does white supremacy exist in the minds of some residents there still? Yes. But would they revive a Klan because of that? Let's hope not. But I have no record of that.
Did somebody up here have a question?
I just noticed in this picture that they're not, you can see their faces. And in my mind, I always thought that they were, trying to be unrecognizable. So is that like something that changed over time, or how did that?
I've noticed that in some of the later photographs, their pictures, people would say things about the Klan like they're cowards. They won't even show their face. And so Forrest Hazel, when he came to Grand Chain, or Moreland, Forrest Hazel Moreland, when he came to Grand Chain, they asked him a question, why do you Klansmen always wear hoods? And he said, well, it's not because we're cowards. It's not because we're hiding. But when we wear our hoods, he said, we can sneak up on the criminals. We can infiltrate and they won't know who we are. Yeah.
Yes. I know as you go down sort of the 55, what's now the 55 and the the railroad corridor down to the south, and you get to places like Mississippi, you can pretty much match in a lot of ways the list of former Klans members with the current power structure, especially politically. Have you seen any of that in this area, or are the records available?
Yeah, good question. And I've looked for records in almost every case because it was a secret organization. For instance, I heard a talk about the history of the Masonic Lodge, which I always in my mind thought was a secret organization. And the speaker, who was a Mason, said, no, we're not a secret organization. We're an organization with secrets. The Klan was a secret organization, and that is your membership was kept secret. So there are no lists. I wish, for instance, all that money had to be sent to order the Klan costume, if they had written the names of who had paid their dues. Yeah. And I'm assuming that, like with a lot of records, organizations, once the organization folds, even church records, unless somebody keeps them, they're just lost. So I have looked and not found any. I mean, people won't even admit there was a Klan, so they're not going to admit having the records up in their attic. So I don't have membership lists. Yeah. And that's not just here. In reading histories about the Klan, it's all over.
I just wanted to speak to the colloquialism of what Anna means. I think that was more or less among Black people so that they would know that was a sundown town and such as that.
That could very well be. Yeah. Jill up here has a question.
Could you just talk a little bit about what a sundown town is? Because there may be some people who don't know that term, but
Sure.
a lot of us from Southern Illinois know the term, but others may not.
Right. So if you're not familiar with what a sundown town is, a friend of mine, James Lowen, we became friends. He started research on this topic. He was from Southern Illinois, and then he went as a professor to one of the universities or colleges, I think in Boston, and became widely known. And he wrote a book about sundown towns. And sundown towns are towns in which Black people were not allowed to live. So they could work in the day, but they had to be on the train or in their car and out of town by sundown. And Thebes, Illinois, which I had mentioned earlier, was a sundown town. And I had another friend, some of you may have known, Louise Ogue, who was the Caro librarian for many years. Louise told me once, and then she wrote it in a letter. I have the documentation. She said she remembers driving from Thebes, between Thebes and Caro, and they had a sign up that said, "Inward, don't let the sun set on you here." It was very open. I've heard people say that there was a sign going into Jonesboro. Other people said, no, it was in a bar in Jonesboro. But yeah, that's a sundown town. And Karnak, Illinois was a sundown town. Ullin, Illinois, where I grew up, was not a sundown town, but it was a segregated town. White people lived on one side of the railroad tracks, and then Black people lived on the other side of the railroad tracks. Well, for the most part. Actually, our family lived on the Black side. We were a white family, but we lived on the Black side of the railroad tracks.
Darrel, do you know anything about Grand Chain? Allegedly a man lynched from Grand Chain.
Yes. Yes. There was a man that was lynched in 1883. from Grand Chain. It was a 4th of July celebration. He had gone on the train down to Cairo, had a little bit to drink. Other people on the train had a little bit to drink. And they got into a confrontation. Somebody bumped against another one, and the guy pulled a gun and killed somebody. At least that's the accusation. He left and went back to Grand Chain. They came, and the deputy or the sheriff came to Grand Chain and got him, brought him back to Mound City, which was the courthouse. And that night, a lynch mob surrounded the courthouse, got him out of his cell, took him to a tree outside the courthouse, and they used a trot line to lynch him or to hang his body. Actually, he was killed by being hit in the back of the head with a pipe maul. And then also they riddled his body with bullets, stripped him naked, and then hanged him up as a display. That happened in 1883. Eli Bugg, I think. Yes, the person he allegedly killed was a white man. There was another incident where a black man from between Olmsted and Grand Chain, this would have been much later in the early 1900s, 19-teens, I believe. His name was Kaler Wisdom, and he allegedly killed his wife, cut off her neck with a knife, and then fled. And people from Grand Chain and Olmsted tracked him down. They beat him, they shot him in the back, and left him for dead in the woods. And the coroner came to reclaim the body and found he was still alive. So he was brought back and recovered. He ended up going on trial, agreed to plead guilty if they would give him life in prison. And he was given life in prison. The story of the judicial system in Pulaski and Alexander County towards African Americans in particular in these years is very poor. For instance, the people who killed Daisy Wilson, they did confess to that murder. From the morning they confessed, by that night, the trial was over and they were sentenced to hang. That's not justice. So they had confessed to being guilty. That's true. They said, we don't even want a trial. And they said, we know would be found guilty. We don't even want a trial. And they were executed from that morning to that evening. So we have a lot in our past, in our communities to address and at least acknowledge, in my opinion.
How do we find more of your work? I know they mentioned you have some publications and
Right.
everything. And
so the research on the Second Ku Klux Klan, SIU is printing that. It'll come out as a book. They say they say in 2023. That would be nice. If so, it would be the end of the year. But that has all these stories and many more in that book. And the title is still working. It started off, the title was going to be A Klansman's Prayer. And then I didn't like that title. So another working title is Old Time Racism in Deep Southern Illinois. And it's still working, but it should be available. Yeah. Past publications, actually there's a group called Past that has copies of a couple of publications that were mentioned in my introduction. And they have a page or website. You can get information there. Also, the Genealogy Society of Southern Illinois has a lot of genealogical type of resource material that I've done that's available. And a lot of it's available on the internet. So the book about slavery is out of print, and SEMO says they're not printing any more physical books. It's still available though digitally through Kindle at no charge. So they're out there. You just have to look for them.
So did I understand right that Klan activity and sundown towns are kind of two different reactions to racism, in that they wouldn't necessarily be active in the same place because there's not in their minds a necessity for a Klan chapter if
So, right, places where the Klan, it depends too on what the local Klan is emphasizing. So up in Williamson and Franklin counties, the Klan there, the 1920s, emphasized anti-immigration and pro-prohibition. They had little, they had some, but most of the violence was directed towards white people. There, like I said, there are exceptions. There was a black mining town called Dumaine, in which I don't remember, a dozen or more black men were killed. But the motivation for that doesn't seem to be that they were black as much that they were pro-union. So I think that's true. And I think that's why in Union County, despite its reputation, there wasn't a lot of Klan activity because it was seen as unnecessary.
We have another question on Zoom. Was the Klan the mob that lynched William James in Cairo in 1909?
What about it?
Was the Klan the mob that lynched William
Yeah.
James?
Not the Klan organization per se, because the first Klan had pretty much disappeared as a official organization by the mid to late 1870s in the South and in the North. The lynching of Will James was in November 1909, and the Second Ku Klux Klan wasn't revived until 1915. So it wasn't the Klan itself. I'm sure it was people who were white supremacists who didn't think this man, because he was black and was charged with this very horrendous crime, should have a trial. And they argued in the press, a lot of times people would justify lynching by saying, well, it's the judicial system. You know, people are charged with crimes or put on trial, and then a jury lets them go. Or they're charged with crimes, they're put in prison, and then the governor pardons them. So they said that they were doing, the lynch mobs would say, we're doing a good thing by bringing about justice. That's the argument they made. What they don't say and don't realize is that lynching is actually murder. It's murder. It's not quick justice. It's murder. Yeah.
We also have someone who shared a photo of the Ku Klux Klan standing in front of the First Baptist Church in Johnston City in the 1920s. So I can show you that.
I'd like to see that. Okay. I know there was a lot more Klan activity in Williamson and Franklin counties. My focus was on Pulaski and Alexander. So when I was in high school, I read a book by Paul Engle called Bloody Williamson. So I read in there about the Klan. And that's when I asked questions. Well, was there a Klan down here? No, certainly not. Yeah.
So when you
think of the second wave of the KKK or the third wave, and you think it's just certain periods of time, and you think that it doesn't exist right now?
No, it still exists now. Again, they claim, and this is from the Southern Poverty Law Center. They estimate, and they keep their eyes on hate groups, and they say there are about 6,000 is their estimate nationwide. Yeah. So does the KKK as an organization, someone asked earlier, does it exist in Pulaski and Alexander counties? And my answer was, I don't know of any. Yep.
So in 1992, I attended a conference in Pekin, Illinois.
Pekin, yes.
And while I was there, they refused to serve me at any restaurant that was there. And this was 1992. And so while I was there, I had to stay in my hotel room while other people would bring me food. 1992. And as I stepped out of the hotel room to go to the Walgreens that was there, I was called all kind of names. And it was not just by young white people, but older white people. And the sheriff had to come and stay outside of my room. And this is 1992.
Right.
But the big part of that was that the week before, they had one of the largest Klan rallies there, right outside of Peoria, right in Pekin, Illinois, at that time. And it was considered one of the largest ones that had ever happened in the United States.
And that's what happens in the 1920s. After these so-called rallies, violence and racial hatred picks up. I can't remember how close Pekin is to Indiana border. Is it more right in the center? Okay, the Illinois River, yeah. In Indiana, I've heard, matter of fact, I have a friend who oversees Pepsi deliveries from a plant in Indianapolis. And she has had workers, Black men who were delivering the product in a certain town. And this is just within the last few months, they were chased. His truck was chased out of town. And they had the windows down shouting profanity. So I don't think it was Anderson. She did give me the name of the town. I don't think it was Anderson, but it was in southern Indiana. And the Klan, actually, of all the states in the country for the second Klan, more members were from Indiana than any other state. And if you put Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois together, that's over 1/3 of all the membership. So also the rally started in Chicago, Springfield. So white supremacy and hatred is everywhere. Yeah. And it doesn't go away until people stand up to it and say, we're not going to, we have to be upstanders. You can't just stand by and not say something.
You're right on that point. These people, they don't just spring up out of nowhere. They're people that deliberately, with forethought, create these groups, whether it's the Klan or things that go back thousands of years, or today in America with our politics and so forth. And their greatest weapon is our silence.
Right.
Their greatest weapon is our silence. And in a lot of cases, cowardliness of our politicians. And the great power behind them is not mainstream, not mainstream religion, but right wing ignorance and superstition of the far right and their hate. I'll proudly say it's the right wing religion behind a lot of this.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay, I appreciate your listening. I hope you left with something to think about on your drive home. If you have any further questions or want to comment or contact me, it's easily done at just darreldexter@hotmail.com. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have. But thanks once again to the DAR for inviting me back. And for all of you who aren't DAR coming to listen to what I have to say. Thank you. Very much.
And thank you, Darrell. I believe that was it recorded or not?
Yes, it's recorded. It'll be on the library's YouTube page, so you can find it there.
Awesome. So you should get, with that, be able to see the pictures and all of that better as well. So I know that several were trying to snap pictures, but because of angles, was a little difficult. Thank you all for coming. DAR members, I ask that you say we're going to have a super quick